if someone tells you that developer relations starts by creating easy to use and resilient APIs for developers, you should trust that person. I was doing here an experience with the Apache Pulsar client for Golang, and I've noticed some very interesting behaviors that made me happy. And those were not behaviors that I was necessarily looking for, but I've ran into a situation where those behaviors kind of popped up, and I was glad to see they were there in the first place. So what I have here is a simple code written in Golang that, as you can see here, essentially creates a client for Pulsar, giving the URL of the Pulsar endpoint that is provided by the environment variable. And then I create a producer out of this client to produce message for a given topic. And then basically what the code does is to continuously, in a forever loop, create a simple message and then serialize this message into JSON and send to the topic asynchronously, which means that if everything goes well, this log message will be printed out, as well as if there are some errors coming from this producer call, an error will be sent, right? So basically this is the logic that has to do with error handling while producing the messages. But as you can see here, I haven't written any code to necessarily handle connection failures or maybe some hiccups that might happen in a network level. So in order to demonstrate this, what I want to do is to execute the script that I've created here that essentially pass the URL of Pulsar as environment variable, the topic name, and then executes my code. So I'm going to execute this script, which obviously is going to fail because Pulsar is not running at this point. Right. But as you can see here, the client keeps printing some messages in the log saying, yeah, the connection was refused, the broker is unavailable, but as you can see here, it doesn't give up, right? So that's the first characteristic that I've noticed. And though I haven't wrote any code in order to handle this, the API itself is handling for me automatically, right? So eventually, obviously, the client can give up, and I've searched, and there is a knob that you can set that dictates how much retries you can have it, as well as how many, like the space between each retry. So maybe you can implement some exponential backoff, right? So this is interesting because sometimes network can fail, right? So I'm going to start my Pulsar here while the client is trying to connect, right? And you're going to see that by the time Pulsar is eventually up, the client will be able to connect to the endpoint and therefore start producing the messages, which is the code that has been written to do, right? So TLDR, when you're designing your APIs, make sure that they are resilient enough to not simply give up and then throw the exceptions or errors to the user, right? This is a bad developer experience. So as you can see here, the producer is continuously sending a message as expected and as advertised because the Pulsar cluster is running. So what I'm going to do is to Ctrl+C and stop my Pulsar cluster. And you're going to see that obviously a connection was previously established, but now it's broken. So the client again keeps retrying until it succeeds in the connection, right? So meanwhile, what I'm going to do is to start up my Pulsar cluster once again. And the second very interesting behavior that I've noticed on this client is that not only the client keeps trying like for a certain period of time, but as you can see here, by the time the connection was reestablished, all the messages that were deemed to be sent out were kept locally on a buffer or queue. I have to check what the actual implementation is, but it's something like a queue or a buffer. And then when the connection was established, all the previous attempt messages were actually flushed out, which means that if you are dealing with scenarios where losing messages or transactions is not tolerable, this is a good thing, right? So this is again another indication that the API needs to worry about things like that, right? It should not be up to the developer, right? Handling fault tolerance and retries, right? Obviously, you can do this. It's your choice. But like I said in the beginning, if you do this in your APIs and make your developer happy to not have to write code for that, this what entails a very good developer experience, right? So kudos for Apache Pulsar to implement a very simple and easy to use as well as reliable API.